All right, this image is by Jerell. You're at ISO 3200, so really high ISO here. And as we look closer at your image, you can see that digital noise. You can see that it's not a smooth gradient here, but you have some greens, if you can see that. And you're just getting that textured effect. You're gonna see it most in the shadow, the like mid-tone shadow areas. You'll see it on his skin in those mid-tone areas also. So that's why we want to keep our ISO low. You're at 19 millimeters, really wide angle, a 4.1 at 1/50th of a second. So a longer exposure there. So what could you do to bring down the ISO? One would be to have your subject sit down. So opposed to standing up, sitting down, so we wouldn't be moving at all, would make this easier to have a longer exposure. And then you could have it at f3.5, it looks like your lens goes to. So opening it up a little bit more as far as the aperture goes, and then seeing if you can have him be still enough, which that's a test in and of itself, to be able to shoot with a little bit of a slower shutter speed. Because one stop of light is like, it's amazing the change, right? Because it's from 3200 to 1600. So that's a big jump in ISO. It's the difference between 1 minute and 2 minutes, or 10 minutes and 20 minutes. So the way that these numbers work is always just doubling or halving, but sometimes that one step can be a big step. So we just need to be really aware of that. The exposure, the amount of light hitting the image sensor, looks good. The amount of light on his face looks good. So that exposure looks good. We just want to adjust how we're getting that light to the image sensor with the shutter speed and aperture and ISO. The focus looks nice and sharp. The light that you're using is a soft light. It's clearly soft light on him, but I'm going to talk about it a little bit more because it looks like you're further away from the window here, and then as we look, we can see that it's kind of shaded up here, and then it slowly moves to a brighter area. So as we get to down here, this is hard light. You can see this, but where you've placed his face in regards to how the light's coming through the window, this is soft light. So you've found the soft light, you moved your subject to the soft light. We see that with the shadow in the background, and you can see how it gets sharper as it moves down his body. So we have brighter light here and softer light on it, brighter light being harder light in this situation here, and then softer light on his face. So it's kind of interesting lighting, but as far as did you get this correct? Did you shoot soft light? That is what's on his face, and that's where we would have been focused. So yes, you did that correctly. This image is by Hannah. You're at ISO 3200, so again, that really high ISO where we're starting to see digital noise. And you see over in all of this area, you can see that like green and red speckles, and it's just not a smooth gradient. You're always going to see it the most in these kind of mid areas, so in the shadowed areas. You can see it on the edge of here more than you can see it back here. You can see more color here than you can back there. So you want to bring that ISO down. f4.5, so you could probably open up your aperture a little bit more to let more light in there. Even one stop would bring this down to 1600 instead of 3200. And then having a little bit of a longer shutter speed. So your subject's sitting here, and he's an adult. So having it at 1/30th of a second might be able to work for you. You'd have to test that because we've seen how that doesn't work for some images, but because your subject is seated, it might work fine here. But we want to make sure we bring down that ISO in this image. Focus is nice and sharp. The light that you have is definitely soft light. You can see the window being reflected in his eyes, which gives this beautiful catch light and brings us right into his eyes. As we look at the light, it's brighter on this side, and then it falls off over here. We can see the shadow in the background, and that has the soft edges, showing that this is soft light. Now this image looks underexposed, about a stop underexposed. So on top of all of those settings I was talking about with your ISO, shutter speed, and aperture, you also want to add some light because you're underexposed here. Now, this might be that you just need to move your subject closer to the window. Like we saw here, having the subject really, really close to the window allows them to have brighter light on them. So that might be an option, or photographing at a different time of day when the light was coming directly through the window, or not directly through the window, stronger through the window. This image is by Emily, and you're at ISO 100, 18 millimeters, f10 at 1/10 of a second. So those settings all look fine. There's nothing that jumps out at me with that. 1/10 of a second, you'd probably have some motion blur, but this image is drastically underexposed. So we're talking like 5 stops underexposed, really underexposed, where we're not able to see the subject's face at all because they're looking out a dark window and it's not bright outside. So there's no light coming in. The light that we're seeing is coming from the side, from indoors. We're not getting any light, window light, which is this assignment. So this image is drastically underexposed here. We would want to reshoot this. Here we're at ISO 400, 30 millimeters, f5.6 at 1/100th of a second. This image is by Leah, and we can see the settings here look fine, but the exposure is really overexposed. You can see all of the area in the background that's blown out, but we also see the subject's face has areas just small that are getting blown out, but there's nowhere that has a good exposure. It's all getting washed out by the light. So you would want to underexpose this from what you have here by probably at least 2 stops of light in order to get that quality of light to really shine through on this subject. The focus is hard to tell because that light's coming through and it's overexposed. It looks like it might be a little bit out of focus because it looks like this area in the background is more in focus. The composition here, you have your subject in the foreground, and then in the background you have a lot going on. Like, I can't even tell what this is. Maybe a curtain, maybe the back of a couch, something's like holding that. So we don't know everything that's going on, but it's competing. It's half of the image and it's competing for our attention. So make sure to eliminate that, any distractions as you're photographing. So getting closer here and shooting this as a vertical shot would work better than including all of that information in the background. All right, that's our last image for SoftLight, and we'll move on to HardLight.